So welcome everybody. Welcome Jerry for the second time. It's an honor to have you again. And welcome to you, Anon, here on my YouTube channel. It's thanks to Jerry. He told me Anon has a real deep story to share with all of us, for the French community and the English one. And Jerry, do you want to introduce Anon? How did you meet him? And then we can hear his story also.
Well, I
As you
believe
want.
if I remember correctly, I was on YouTube exposing the fact that the psychotic voices that schizophrenics hear run well patterns. They run repeatable, specific patterns. Okay. Now, if they're running patterns, they can't be hallucinations because something holds them to that pattern, those patterns. And I think Anon contacted me and said, "Hey, I've had experience with these, and I don't know how did we first meet?"
Yeah, I actually reached out to Jerry probably about a year and a half or so ago because I saw the great work that he was doing, exposing the nature of schizophrenia and what's really going on. And Jerry kind of vetted me out to see if I was genuine and authentic, and I showed him some of my experiences and what I've been through. And he realized that, yeah, this is right up the alley of what he's discovered and encountered. So Jerry and I have been kind of doing a tag team approach every once in a while. We'll talk about our experiences on relationship to schizophrenia and these so-called entities that they often encounter.
Yeah. So what's helpful is just me being out there in the wilderness screaming the truth. It is not as effective as hearing it firsthand from somebody who has been through it, got through it. Because the psychiatric mafia is telling their patients, well, once you have schizophrenia, you're done for the rest of your life. You're going to have to take our toxic meds. No, it's like nobody recovers from this. It's like that that what is it that sign over hell says all who enter here leave all hope behind. I don't know who I forgot who did that, but I've been in mental health over a half century. I've worked in virtually every kind of mental health institution in the United States, including the biggest psychiatric hospital on the planet. I've worked psych crisis and hospital emergency rooms. I worked in psychology in the state prison for years. I've worked in mental health centers. I've worked in private psych hospitals. I've done it all. So I've seen it all. I've got a BA and undergraduate degree in psychology. I got a master's degree in counseling. I was thinking, going all through this education stuff, I was looking for answers. What they do a great job of describing these different mental illnesses, but a very poor job of saying what causes them.
Okay? Yes.
And I'm looking like, okay, what causes these things? Why is this happening? And there was just this hodgepodge of garbage. So I'm like, after I finished the undergraduate degree, I'm like, well, maybe they're holding the answers in the master's degree. Maybe they just give it to master's people. So I went and finished a master's degree, and there were very few answers there. So I went, well, maybe they're holding the truth in the PhD programs. Maybe they only tell the PhD people what's really going on. So I went up there, spent 2 years there, and it was a complete crock of bull. It was just like they say, piled higher and deeper. Some of the most egotistical people on the planet were in there. And I could see they were hammering me into one of their pawns, to fit into their system. And I had already seen too much to do that. So I started realizing when I first went to work at this massive state psychiatric hospital that what they were telling us was not the truth. So the first thing that stuck out to me was here they are telling the entire planet that mental illness is due to a chemical imbalance in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and somehow their drugs, all these different drugs, somehow correct that imbalance. Okay, so I was working shoulder to shoulder with psychiatrists, for 7 years. Never did I ever see them give a test that tested for the baseline of what neurotransmitters were out of balance, and I think there's like 23 of them, how much they were out of balance, or which ones were out of balance.
If I may interject here for a second, I went through the same
Go
thing.
for it.
I spent 4 weeks in a psychiatric ward. This is probably back about 1990. And I heard the same things. Oh, it's a chemical imbalance. We have to get the chemicals right, rebalanced back in your brain. And I come from an engineering and scientific background. So I asked, okay, well, what's the baseline then of where the chemical balance is supposed to be? I got blank stares from the physicians. They didn't have an answer for it. And it's really a guinea pig approach with the medications because they really don't know where that chemical balance should be. But Jerry will get more into why a lot of these medications, they're not treating the causes. They're just masking the symptoms and damaging the brain in the process.
Exactly.
Yes, and they do damage the brain. With long-term use, they will rot out the brain. And that was discovered with long-term patients. When they did autopsies on psychiatric patients, their brains were shrunk like walnuts. So some of the honest researchers said, hey, listen, we suspect this is due to these antipsychotic drugs.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the big pharma and the psychiatric mafia jump up and go, no, it's the schizophrenia that's doing that. The mysterious schizophrenia, it's causing that. And the researchers went, no, we don't think so. So they started feeding these antipsychotic drugs to rats and mice and monkeys. And with long-term use, they saw it was shrinking their brains also. So not only are they not curing anything, they're causing, with long-term use, they're causing permanent neurological damage, and to both the brain and the peripheral nervous system. So that they're doing damage. Now, they don't tell the patient that. I've never seen a psychiatrist ever tell a patient how dangerous these drugs were, ever. They just go, okay, well, you'll get some blurred vision and your tongue will feel thick, and you might your saliva might dry up and you might feel gorked out for a while, but you'll get used to it. They don't ever tell them how dangerous these drugs are, or to watch out for the clinical symptoms of akinesia, where that means their nervous system is starting to it's poisoned from these drugs.
Yeah, these medications, there's a slow-term poison over time. And for the short-term use, I can understand it until the person is able to kind of heal themselves. There are some cases that Jerry's encountered where somebody has to be on those medications for the short term. But the long term, you're not solving their problems. You're just drugging them out for the rest of their lives.
And Anan, how long did you first take these drugs? Explain to us how began that journey?
Well, I was one of the lucky ones. Jerry, do you want to go into my story now, or do you want to talk a little more about?
Let me finish up the thing, and sure. And you feel free to jump in when you.
Yes, please.
When you want.
Thank you.
So these drugs weren't curing anybody. They were just masking over the symptoms. And what they did that was even more immoral than that is when these neurological symptoms of brain damage started showing up, they would mask those with another drug called cogentin. So they were rotting out the person's nervous system while the person wasn't feeling it because the cogentin covered those symptoms. Okay, so they do not know what the chemical balance of the brain even is. They have no idea. They have no idea what's out of balance or by how much. Like Anon said, they just kind of go to a dartboard and they go, well, we'll start with this medication and we'll just keep using it. If it doesn't work, we'll either increase the dosage or change to another medication. It's just like a dartboard. It's a guessing game. It's totally subjective. There are no tests to test for what chemicals are in the brain are out of balance at all. None. They don't have a test. It does not exist. Okay. The second lie they were perpetuating on the entire Western world is their diagnostic classification manual, their listing of all these mental illnesses. All right. The PhD programs and the universities treat that listing as a Bible. You know, these mental illnesses are real, and these are the symptoms, and this is what they look like, and these are the subdirectories of them. You open it up and it looks like a scientific treatise. I mean, it's just overwhelming.
What are we on now? DSM what, 5? Is that what we're at now?
Yeah, the DSM-5 now, I think.
So I was aware of the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, the DSM, various versions, before I had my schizophrenic years, and it's a bold attempt to kind of classify certain mental illnesses, but it's done by committee, and of course you have different influences. It's really just for insurance code purposes, because a lot of mental illnesses, there's a broad category of things going on, and this DSM manual tries to classify it, but it's not doing it correctly. It's not the correct classification, and I think the most strongest objective I have to it is that it doesn't consider that a soul or a spirit is real in an individual, and that's one of its greatest faults.
Well, that's one of the greatest faults of both psychiatry and psychology. You know, having to investigate the mind or the spirit is, you know, they looked into it and they go, well, we can't measure it, we can't see it, we can't manipulate it, you know, so they just blew it off. You know, they don't, in all the years I was in, you know, 8 years of training in psychology, not once did they mention the spirit or the mind. They don't know what the spirit is. They don't know what the mind is.
In science, yes.
Right. So what they do is they study behavior. So psychology is a study of behavior. But where does that behavior come from? You know, it comes from the mind. If you don't know what the mind is or how it works, then you're just looking at behavior. You know, and it doesn't solve the problem. You know, you're manipulating behavior. Psychiatry drugs behavior, psychology tries to alter behavior, but they don't take into account where it comes from or the source or the cause of it. So, you know, this DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, it's a complete work of fiction. It's completely made up. There's not a single objective test for any one of those, what is it, 256? It's more than that now. 297 psychiatric disorders in the DSM-5. Okay, they're all made up. This group of psychiatrists get together once every 3 years, and they said it's like a tobacco barn. They jump in there and they go, hey, I got a new mental illness, and they, you know, this is what it looks like, and da-da-da. 2/3 of those people have ties with big pharma. And they go, well, can we make a medicine that would treat the symptoms of this thing? And if they think they can, they add it to the DSM. So, you know, they started off in 1952, they started off with 106 psychiatric disorders. In 1980, they had 256. So they're making them up as they go along.
You know, I mean, the drug industry, as we know, a lot of the pharmaceutical industry is big business because there's no money in the cure. The money's in the treatment of the symptoms.
That's right. They're not after curing anything. And if you look at what the FDA has done with research money into schizophrenia, they have lowered it down to a trickle. You know, they have lowered it, and they manipulated the statistics to make it look like they're giving a lot more money into research in schizophrenia than they actually are. Schizophrenia is one of the top 10 illnesses in the World Health Organization has classified.
Incredible.
You know, one of the top 10. They're not even looking into it. You know, they're making $74 billion a year worldwide selling antipsychotic drugs that cure absolutely nothing. You know, they just tamper down symptoms. Now they have 297 psychiatric disorders in the DSM.
Yeah, the situation with a lot of the mental illnesses and schizophrenia is that it's in my opinion, based on my experience, it's somewhat of a shamanic experience or a spiritual battle. It's really, and the medicines, they're physical. And what's going on has to do more with the brain, the mind, the psyche. And it's almost like your brain's like a radio. It receives certain signals, it can transmit them through the ether. And as Jerry mentioned about the scientific method relies on being able to quantify things, measure them, having qualitative analysis from it. Not everything can be measured, and science refuses to accept that. So, Jerry, do you want me to kind of go into my story now?
Well,
yes,
just let me a few more things.
Sure
Okay.
thing.
What I want to do is summarize, well, first of all, into the voices. Now, so psychiatry insists that the voices are hallucinations. You know, they've never studied them. They've never looked into them. They just went, we're psychiatrists, we're the high priests of mental health. We hereby declare that the voices are hallucinations. Okay? But they run very specific patterns. They're negative, they're anti-religious, they foster and create negative emotion, they energetically drain their victims. There's 23 of these patterns you can find on my website at jerrymarzinsky.com. Anybody can see these. So what psychiatry, like Anan was saying, schizophrenia is an energetic spiritual disorder. Okay? You can't treat it with physical drugs. So what psychiatry is doing is like if you have a magnetic field, okay, you can't see that magnetic field, just like you can't see what causes schizophrenia. You know, you can see the symptoms of it, which are these patterns, okay, but you can't see that energy itself. Now you get a jar of iron filings, you put it on that magnetic field, then you will see the pattern that appears, okay, which is the same patterns as are on my website. What psychiatry is doing is like getting physical drugs and dumping it on that magnetic energetic field, you know, scumming up that field and thinking that they're curing something. You can't cure an energetic disability, an energetic disorder with a physical drug.
Yeah.
So now Jerry has a whole list of patterns that he discovered with dealing with these. You can call them voices, you can call them strong thoughts, you can call them external entities. There's different ways of interpreting this stuff. But the voices, they're bullies, they gaslight, they lie, they will manipulate reality. There's a speculation that they're actually feeding off of trauma. They want to put their target or victim in a state of extreme negative emotions to kind of draw or feed off that negative energy.
Yes, and you can see that when anybody who works with schizophrenics or has a schizophrenic in their family, you ask them, how much energy do you have before the voices come? How much energy do you have after the voices come? And they will tell you they're drained after the voices come. And I did a little research thing on that when I was working in one of the state psychiatric hospitals, and it was statistically significant. A 1 to 10 chart. How much energy do you have before the voices come? How do you have how much after? It was statistically significant how much energy they felt they lost after the voices attacked. So these things are parasites. They're energetic parasites. They turn your emotions negative, and then they can drain them.
And
Go
I
ahead,
think,
Anon.
well, I was always fascinated. You were bold enough to actually start asking your patients, what are the voices saying? No other psychiatrist that I'm aware of out there actually took the effort to actually ask, what are the voices saying? And Jerry went on a limb there to do that, and he got scolded for it, which makes absolutely no sense. You know, if your patient's going through something, find out what they're witnessing or encountering. And I was kind of dumbfounded when you told me that story, Jerry, about how you were actually reprimanded for asking the patients, what are the voices saying?
Oh yeah, when the psychiatrist found out I was doing that, I got called into their office and threatened. You know, they said the voices are hallucinations, and by you asking questions about what they're saying, you're reinforcing those hallucinations and making the patients worse. And he ordered me to stop. That happened twice. Okay, they don't want anybody looking into this. You know, so first pattern I noticed the voices were completely negative. They didn't say anything positive at all. The first question was, what holds them on such a negative pattern? Why aren't they random like hallucinations? Why aren't some positive, some negative, you know, some neutral? Why aren't they all over the place like regular hallucinations? They're not. Second one that stuck out is they're anti-religious. They hate the 23rd Psalm. A couple of patients told me that the voices react to the 23rd Psalm like worms thrown on a hot frying pan. They don't want the patient reading the Bible. They don't want them going to church. They don't want them saying prayers. What kind of hallucination would do that? Why would a hallucination be anti-religious? So you just go down the line to these 23 patterns that these voices are running. And that's the operational definition of the voices. You know, they're not hallucinations. They run fixed, repeatable patterns. And anything that does that is not a hallucination. Except that, you know, psychiatry is making billion a year selling these antipsychotic drugs. They don't want anybody knowing the cause of schizophrenia is the voices. You get rid of the voices and schizophrenia disappears.
Yes.
Paranoid schizophrenia anyway. There's a bunch of different kinds. Paranoid schizophrenia is the major kind. It's the kind that Anon had. It's the kind that affects most people. If you can get rid of those voices by any manner at all the symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia disappear with them.
Do you
And
think
oh, go ahead.
sorry.
I'm saying there are various methods out there for getting rid of the voices without relying on chemicals or the pharmaceuticals. And Jerry works in some of those various methods. Did you want to touch base on that? Some of the methods that seem to work?
Well, yeah, there's several. One is prayer. The 23rd Psalm. Hit them with the 23rd Psalm. They can't stand it. Another one is they're consummate liars. They lie about everything. They don't care what they tell you. Their goal is to upset you, to get you on a negative vibrational pattern, because it's only then that they can take your energy. They can't take your energy when you're feeling good and you're vibrating. So the voices will tell patients, you're no good, you're rotten, you're stupid, you're ugly. Just every lie in the book. Okay? So if the patient realizes that they're lying, and they don't believe what they're saying, then the voices can't get their claws in them. Okay? So one thing that they can do is on my website, again, at jerrymarzinsky.com, there's a program called the That's a Lie program. They can look that up and implement that on a consistent basis, and it will weaken the voices and sometime get rid of them. Okay? The latest one is a brand new cutting edge therapy called the Mace energy method,
Yes.
which actually works energetically. And it will sometimes get rid of the voices, but it will, if it can't do that, it will get rid of the negative emotional energy that they feed off of. And you can read about that on a website called causisminstitute.com. Okay. It's cutting edge. It's the new thing coming, and the establishment wants nothing to do with it because it actually cures psychological disorders. It cures them. It gets rid of them. The patient is done in an hour. They're gone. Those traumas are no longer in their mental universe.
Do you think, Jerry, that all of us have less or more entities in our mind?
They hit us all.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yes.
So any negative thought about yourself comes from them.
Thank you.
Any negative thought about somebody else comes from them. But you look at how your mind works, and it's really not your mind. During any moment you have hundreds of thoughts going through your mind. During a specific day, you got maybe thousands of thoughts go through your mind. Now, because it appears that those thoughts appear to be in your head, you believe that they're your thoughts and they come from you. Okay. But like Anan was saying, your brain is like a radio. It's like a radio receiver. It receives those thoughts based on the frequency that your volition is at, where your spirit is at, where your feeling is at, where your love is at. So criminals love bad behavior. They love to steal stuff. They value stolen stuff more than they do earned stuff. So their love is stealing stuff. Good people, they love other people. So that's where they're tuned to. Okay. So wherever you're tuned to, you are attracting those thoughts from the outside coming into your mind. Now, the trick that these negative entities do is they will insert negative thoughts into your thought system. You're no good, you're rotten, you're stupid, you're evil, you're da-da-da-da. But those thoughts sound just like your regular thoughts. It's not like they come into your mind, they go, we're the evil ones, we're putting in. It doesn't sound, that sounds just like your regular thoughts. So you think they're your regular thoughts, but if you believe them, then you become them. Okay. So you start acting on those as if they're yours. So you have to understand that every negative thought that comes into your mind is not yours. It doesn't belong to you. You're the chooser of which thoughts that you want to pay attention to. Now, what's so scary about these negative voices is they'll insert those thoughts, and most people don't understand that thoughts come in from the outside. They think that's their thoughts. So if the schizophrenic listens to those thoughts, you know, like, oh, this guy's following you, or you're going to die, or whatever these negative things the voices are telling them, if they believe that, they're going to start acting that, and they're going to be turning into what the voices are telling them to turn into.
It's
So
almost like they're trying to take over your personality at times. I mean,
yes.
I know what I went through. I mean, it felt like an exorcist where something was trying to take over my personality, and you almost had to really fight to keep it at bay.
Yeah, go ahead. Go into your story now.
Okay.
And
So
I'll just jump in.
sounds good. So I'm a recovered schizophrenic. I was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder back about 1990. And it's interesting because I actually had taken some college courses in psychology, and I took abnormal psychology. So I was very aware of some of these conditions and classifications. And then when I started encountering them myself a few years after taking those college courses, I was like, wow, there's something to this that's going on more than just what DSM says. There is something to what the religious scriptures say, and entities trying to take over human beings and that sort of thing. I come from a very scientific background. I'm a mechanical engineer by degree, so I have to work in a world of logic and rationality all the time. But after what I encountered and went through, I'll tell you, there are other realms out there that we don't really fully understand. So my condition kind of started about my mid-20s. When there's a pattern with schizophrenia, it tends to, not always the case, but it does tend to come on about the mid-20s. I think that's when a person is trying to decide who they are, or where they want to go in life. They're trying to make those life decisions. Other times it can come on after somebody's encountered a lot of trauma. I think these so-called entities look for those that have psychic trauma as a way to almost get in through certain psychic fissures, I call them, or cracks.
Right. Sexual,
almost like
physical, and emotional trauma.
Almost like sharks or vultures. They circle those that look like they could be vulnerable. So quite often schizophrenics can come from a dysfunctional family background where they have been traumatized. That was probably a little bit of my case. So I graduated college and I started to read the Bible more intensely. I had a pretty strong faith. I was a baptized Greek Orthodox, attended Protestant Sunday school, and went to a Roman Catholic youth group. So I mean, I was aware of some of the scriptures. And I tried to be a decent human being per the teachings of what Jesus Christ allegedly put forth. So I started to read the Bible very intensely after college because I kind of wanted to remove the middlemen. I didn't want to deal with the orthodoxy or what the priests tell me. I wanted to read it for myself. And that's when things started kind of happening, going haywire. At times, I would say I felt very ecstatic, almost Christ-like. And then other times, I felt like I was being dragged through the darkest depths of hell. It was almost like something was telling me that I was a failure in life, to give it up. You're worthless. You have no meaning. Nobody's going to like you. And what these very strong thoughts or voices were doing, they distort your reality. But they're not only distorting your reality, they're also showing you altered realities. So it becomes very difficult to get your grounding as far as what's real and what's not. You're being shown certain things that your mind can't quite always process. So I got to the point where I was getting so depressed from these constant attacks, and they would definitely try and isolate you. Like they would tell you things like nobody's going to like you. You'll have no friends. They try to keep you isolated and away from other people.
Yes, they do. They don't want you around other people. The family becomes an enemy. Anybody who tries to help the schizophrenic becomes an enemy. They tell the patient, you know, drive them off. All they want is the person locked in their room, listening to them all day long, not doing anything else, you know. So it's a battle for their attention.
So I hit rock bottom dealing with all these negative thoughts and voices. I was unemployed at the time. I was kind of feeling economic destitute. I think I was below poverty level that year. There was just a lot going on. A lot of family trauma was kind of catching up to me or waking up. So there's just a whole bunch of things going on. It's almost like the mind was on overload. But I remember I started to crash, like going to a state of severe depression was actually another symptom that was occurring. And I remember it got so bad that I could no longer see colors. I was only seeing black and white. I couldn't, I wasn't eating. I stopped kind of eating because these voices would tell you that you're not worthy of food. You don't deserve it. And I was headed kind of really far downhill. They had put me on lithium at the time, a very low dose of lithium. But I got to tell you, when you're getting attacked with these voices or thoughts, you almost can't think for yourself. For example, I remember times I couldn't even add numbers together. I couldn't even focus on being able to add 2 plus 2 together because your thoughts are so overwhelmed. And I remember at times I was like thrashing, like my arms would move, my legs would move around. And I wasn't the one moving it. It felt like something else was moving it. It really felt like something was trying to take over my personality or my body at certain times. So I ended up kind of crashing, and I just remember I was thrashing all over the place. I was brought to the emergency room of a normal hospital, and they ran a few tests like MRIs and that sort of thing to make sure it wasn't something neurological, and they concluded it was psychological. They thought it had been an overdose of lithium, but the chemical analysis came back. Nobody mentioned anything about that. To be honest with you, I was so depressed I couldn't remember even take the lithium half the time. So I ended up in a psychiatric ward. Spent about 4 weeks there, and I was at rock bottom. I mean, I felt like I had no future. I felt like I had no self-worth. I'm hearing all these strong thoughts or voices, and I'm kind of trying to fight them off. Like part of me is saying, okay, this is just my mind playing tricks on me. Part of me is saying, this is something external attacking me. I was kind of going back and forth. This is kind of a religious battle or a spiritual battle of some sort going on here. And I remember the different drugs that they would give me all the time. As Jerry mentioned, they don't know what works and what doesn't. I tried all sorts of pills, octagonal ones, pink ones, blue ones, different combinations, different cups. And they would give you these drugs to try and see if they can snap you out of your condition. And they're not the type of drugs that you want to deal with on the black market. They're not recreational drugs by any means. I mean, they make you feel like you have lead feet where you can barely walk. There's a few days in the psychiatric hospital I don't even remember, and that was probably from the medications. I can remember one time on one particular combination of drugs that they gave me, I would turn my head to look in a different direction, and what would happen is the scenes would shift to catch up, and I would turn it back and go back and forth. And you're trusting these people are looking out for your best interest, but you're really not so sure sometimes, especially being in that sort of paranoid state of having affective schizophrenic disorder. So I kind of put myself in a split mind to deal with all this. I became an observer a little bit of what I was going through. It was kind of a way of scientifically dealing with it, but at the same time, I was also immersed in it. And the hospital staff kept asking, "Are you hearing voices? Are you hearing voices?" And I kept saying, "Well, I'm having very strong thoughts, but I'm not sleeping. It's just my mind playing tricks on me." I always put that little bit of a caveat that it was my mind playing tricks on me. Because part of me didn't kind of really trust them. And I didn't like being a guinea pig of all these different drugs that they were putting me on. And I remember one night in the hospital, the voices got to be very, very strong. It became like a whole cacophony. And a good analogy is that it's almost like you're attending a play or you're in the movie theater and the show or movie hasn't started yet. And you have all the people in the audience having their background conversations going on, talking on their cell phones, having conversations with each other. That's what it sounded like. So I remember at one night in the hospital, the voice got super, super strong. And I was trying to ignore them. I was kind of fighting them off. And eventually, I remember it kind of came down to a committee of about maybe 9 or 7 voices that were talking among themselves. But I do remember one of the voices very distinctly saying, "What are we going to do about him?" Meaning they're referring to me. And I do remember that distinctly occurring in the hospital.
You know, and I've had patients where they hear the voices talking in their head. Well, let's murder him this way, or let's kill him this way, or this is what we should do to him. So they can hear that conversation going on among the voices. Okay. And they know that's not who they are. You know, it's separate from them. But, you know, you tell psychiatry that and they dump more drugs on you.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I was in this extreme state of cognitive dissonance. I mean, here I am, a mechanical engineer. I have a very rational, logical mind. I'm going through these weird internal states and voices and thoughts and occurrences. So none of the drugs or medications were working for me. I was in a really, really bad state. And I actually remember one time being in the lobby of the psychiatric ward. I was walking and I walked right into a wall. My arms and legs kept moving. I kept walking. And I was laughing at myself, thinking how stupid this must look, that I can't turn myself to move against this away from the wall. But it's almost like I couldn't come up with a train of thought to turn my body, or it felt like something else was actually in control, moving my muscles and arms for me. Like it wasn't myself, that I wasn't doing it myself. So it was getting to the end of my stay in the psychiatric hospital. There was like week 4. My health insurance was about to run out. I was about to end up in a state psychiatric hospital, and they decided to resort to ECT, electroconvulsive therapy. Now, what they do is it's not as severe as it was back in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, what Jerry witnessed. In my case, they gave me a general anesthesia to relax the muscles, and they basically put a voltage across the brain.
Okay, so we're talking about energy again.
And they did that once. And I remember they told me I would have short-term memory loss. But I remember at the very first ECT treatment, I felt better. My mind was quiet. I wasn't hearing all those voices and negative thoughts. I mean, I was still at rock bottom, but I felt like, okay, I can rebuild myself as a human being now because the thoughts are gone. I had clarity of mind for the first time in a long, long, long time.
And what I saw at the state hospital there, they were given 3,000 of these a year. And what would happen is kind of what Anon was saying, is the voices would disappear for a short period of time after being shocked. So here again, we're talking about an energetic therapy, not a physical one. Now, they would come back, but they would disappear for a short period of time. So it did have an effect on them.
Now, I told the staff that I felt great after this one ECT treatment. I'm doing better. But they insisted that I had to go, no, you have to have a total of 6 ECT treatments. So I had a total of 6 of them. I think 2 or 3 were inpatient, and I think the remaining 3 I was outpatient. So the very strong thoughts and voices had gone away for a little while. So this is probably the fall of 1990. But then they started to come back, probably about December of 1990, January 1991. But this time they were different. There seemed to be more of a hierarchical structure to them. But I remember I started going through a series of stages, almost like trials or tribulation or torments. And I remember the first stage, something was offering me extreme wealth, riches, and fame. If I basically kind of sold my soul to it, it was offering mammon and actually showed me like a business model or path how to get there. Now I'd have to sacrifice my ethics and my morals to do that. And the offer was tempting because I was in a broken state. Like as I mentioned, I was below poverty level at that point in my life. But I turned the offer down. I said no, thank you, because I did not feel it was coming from something that was looking out for my best interests. And here it was. I've been reading the Bible a little bit, and then I'm starting to have these occurrences of going through what Jesus Christ allegedly went through, being tempted by the devil in the desert when he was out there for 40 days. And then I started having these similar encounters. And part of me is feeling that this is madness, this is psychosis, what my head is doing here. The other part of me is saying, no, this is something real that's going on here. This is a real profound religious experience that's occurring. So over the next months, I went through various stages where I'd be kind of attacked by different voices or thoughts. It's almost like a tribunal. And I remember one of the stages was telling me that humanity is worthless, they would never learn. And it started showing me how awful humanity is through like some things that occurred in my past And it was almost becoming like a cinematography scene, or like a movie, like where it would show scenes of things that occurred in my life. But then it went even farther to show me scenes of like war and the violence and destruction that humanity has done throughout the past. And it kept telling me, see, humanity is worthless. They will never learn. They will never change. It's like I was being put on trial, and all of humanity was being put on trial at the same time. And I kept defending against these attacks. And I would say to them, yes, humanity has their problems, but you don't judge a whole species by the actions of a few. I said, there's a lot of goodness to humanity as well. You got to take the good with the bad. So there's a whole bunch of different stages that I was going through over these months. And these attacks would go on quite frequently. And I remember one would show me what a horrible being I was, that I would eat the meat of other animals. And I would counter their arguments and saying, you know, God created animals with teeth and mouth and tongue. I said, you're attacking humanity for eating other animals when other animals eat other animals. That doesn't seem right or fair. And I remember it would make me feel awful for every fly, ant, or worm that I ever killed in my life. I used to do some fishing for trout or bass or sunnies at local ponds and rivers. And of course, you have to hook an earthworm onto the hook, the bait, to send out the fish. Well, these voices or entities would keep bringing this up over and over again as a way to make me feel guilty for what I had done, to kind of, it seemed like they were feeding off these negative thoughts coming off of me. So there was a whole series of these different stages or trials. I don't know if I was being tormented, tortured, if it was some sort of initiation or cleansing process. It seemed to be a whole bunch of things going on simultaneously. I remember one of the attacks in particular, they started saying that, you know, you and humanity are just a bunch of muscle and bones, and you're destined to rot when you die and eaten by worms. And it's like they were mocking our form, saying that, you know, well, look at you, you're disgusting creatures. And I said to them, hey, we didn't make ourselves this way. I said, talk to God. God made us this way, not I. You can't blame us for our shape or our form. And it was interesting because in this particular attack, they backed off right away. It was almost like they saw that my argument or my rebuttal was strong enough against them that they said, okay, he's right on that point. We can't get him on that. So it's almost like I was encountering a series of like prosecution or a series of adversaries, you might say, throughout this whole process. So I went through a whole bunch of these various tortures and torments and stages, and it seemed to be going up some sort of hierarchy where the voices seemed to be a little bit different, or the thoughts were a little bit different at the various stages that I was going through. And I was on the fence. I was going back and forth. Okay, are these my own thoughts? Or am I really being attacked by something, a non-corporeal entity who's inserting these voices in my head? I mean, I kept going back and forth on this. I wasn't sure either way. So I'm approaching the summer of 1991. I was at rock bottom, and this final attack started telling me that God does not exist. Give it up. There's no point in believing God. He or she is not real. God has no meaning. God is dead. I mean, anything to kind of destroy my faith. And I was trying to draw upon the best of my Christian Judaic understanding of some of the scriptures, the better aspects of the scriptures, I should say, to kind of deal with this. And finally, I was ready to give up. I mean, I was suicidal, and these entities would tell me how to kill myself. They kept wanting me to climb a high electric voltage tower and jump into the wires. They instructed me how to hook up a exhaust pipe to my car to create carbon monoxide poisoning and kill myself that way. And I started to go through with it. I mean, I started actually getting the pipes collecting this stuff, and some higher thoughts saved me. I really feel like there were multiple entities. Some were looking out for my best interest, trying to save me. Others were trying to destroy me. It was a cosmic battle going on in my head here. So finally, I was at rock bottom. I had no job. I had no hope of a future. I've been diagnosed with affective schizophrenic disorder less than a couple years ago. I started praying to God to give me a sign. I said, God, give me a sign that I'm really going through something legitimate here, that this isn't just some madness in my head that's occurring. I said, give me a sign. And I prayed so intense. It's probably the most intense praying I ever did, because I needed to know that, was this just my mind playing tricks on me? Or was I really going through some sort of profound spiritual shamanic experience? I wasn't sure what was going on. I didn't care what the sign was. It could have been anything. It could have been a priest showing up my door, knocking at the door to say hello. If I saw a rabbi walking down the street, I would have accepted that. If I received a Bible or a Quran in the mail by mistake, I would have accepted that as a sign. But after the 2 weeks of most intense praying, I had a vision one night on waking up. Alexander, do you have the ability to screen share? Because I can actually show you and
Yes, of course.
the audience what it is that occurred, what the vision was.
Here you go.
Now, all of this is what psychiatry is insisting are hallucinations. And you can see from what Anon is saying, there were coherent conversations between him and these entities. They were far from hallucinations.
Okay, can you see my screen here?
Yes, yes.
Okay, is that clear? Does it kind of show the inside of a room?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So as I mentioned before, the last trial of tribulation I was going through from these attacks was something telling me that God does not exist. Give it up. Your life is meaningless. There's no point. And I was praying to God, give me a sign that you do exist. I need to know, what's going on here. I can't go on any farther. You got to give me some sort of sign, or else I'm done. I was probably going to commit suicide if nothing had occurred. So I wanted to know that we were more than just atoms and molecules and flesh and blood. I wanted to know that there was something to our spirit and soul. So this is what the inside of my room would look like. So after the most intense praying, I woke up about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I just felt something intense in the room. There was a presence in the room. I didn't know what it was. I'm looking around. I didn't see anything. So I'm lying on my back looking up. I could feel there's something in the room. And this is a ceiling light fixture that was in my room at the time. And then all of a sudden, I start to see this smoke or this fog start coming into the room. At first, I thought it was an electrical fire. And I was kind of preparing to exit the room, but I realized, hey, that's not occurring near where the wires are in the light fixture. And then I realized the smoke or fog or cloud-like substance that's coming into the room, it's not coming out of the ceiling. It's coming out of a plane or that's about a foot below the ceiling. And more of this fog or luminous essence starts coming into the room. And it wasn't moving like smoke. It moved almost the way ink would move through water. If you ever dropped food coloring in a glass of water and how it kind of spreads and flows, that's the way it was moving. And then it dawned on me, I'm having a visual hallucination. I'm thinking to myself, here I am, diagnosed with affective schizophrenic disorder. Now I'm starting to have visual hallucinations. I'm thinking my condition's getting worse. The other part of me, I said, the scientist in me wanted to see, okay, where's this going to go? What is my crazy schizoaffective brain going to tell me? What am I going to see here? So I was more curious at this point than scared, but I knew this was not normal reality. And then I started to see kind of this portal open up within the center where the smoke or cloud or fog is coming into the room. And this portal's growing. It's getting bigger and bigger. It's very dark. I couldn't see into it that much. But I realized the smoke is actually coming out from inside this portal. It's coming out from the inside periphery of the opening of the portal or gateway, if you want to call it. So the portal's getting bigger and bigger. More and more of the smoke or cloud-like essence is filling the room. I looked in the portal. It was very dark. I really couldn't see anything into it. And then all of a sudden, whoosh, I see these two snake-like or serpentine tails move from bottom to top in the portal. And I was thinking, whoa, what is going on here? What is this thing? I was grateful that it was in this portal and not in my room, but I spoke too soon on that. I remember very distinctly the emotional state that I was in within each of these various stages of this vision or hallucination that occurred. So I'm watching these serpentine tail-like movements within the portal. It's moving from bottom to top. It looked like there were two tails. I don't know if it was multiple entities or just one that had two tails. So more and more of the smoke or cloud-like, fog-like substance is filling the room. And then all of a sudden I see those serpentine entities move within the cloud itself. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this thing's actually in my room now. I didn't know what was going on here. I mean, I'm frightened, but also curious at the same time. So I see the serpentine entities move within the cloud. I knew it had entered the room. It was still in the cloud. I didn't know what was going to happen next. And then it exited. Now, when it came out of the cloud, since I was seeing a serpentine or snake-like movements, I expected this thing to have like a snake-like or reptile head to it, being a snake, of course. But it didn't. It had a mammalian head to it. It looked almost like a dog or lion-like from the side. I remember it had a mane coming out the back. And it seemed to have like a seam running down the side of it. Almost like I mentioned, I'd seen two tails when it was in the portal. It's almost like it had two tails that could act as one member, like it came together. But I remember there was a seam kind of down the side. Its spine, the vertebrae did not look snake-like, but it was something different. But I remember this is exactly what I saw because I started laughing to myself, thinking, this is what my crazy schizophrenic mind comes up with. Some sort of creature with a lion-like, dog-like face and a serpentine body. I'm thinking, other things will come out of the cloud, like a duck with a hippo head on it, or a frog with some sort of a goat face on it. Because it's just, these are hallucinations. There's not supposed to follow any type of pattern, just this random stuff going on. So this thing enters my room. Now I came across this in the last 2 years. The vision I saw was back in 1991. This I found on the internet probably in about 2020. When I had this visual hallucination, there was no internet back then, or it was very much in its infancy. But this is a entity, goes back to ancient Egyptian times, referred to as Chinubis. The Gnostics, if you're aware of Gnosticism at all, refer to this entity as Abraxas, the Demiurge, Sackless, Yaldabaoth. There's a few other names it goes by. But the similarities are uncanny. It's the seam down the side of the entity that I saw, the mane, it looks like a mammalian face, almost lion, monkey, dog-like from the side, and a serpentine body. And this image, I think, is from about the 4th or 5th century AD. Here are some other amulets that I found online. This is, 3rd, 4th century. Yet they referred to as Chinubis by the Egyptians. And you notice even in the amulet at the bottom corner, you can see there's almost like a seam running down the side of its body. So I'm lying on my bed looking up. The cloud had formed, this entity comes into my room, and then it turns and faces me. And when it came face on, I was frightened, but I was more curious because, as I mentioned, this is not normal reality. I didn't know what was going on here. Was I having a hallucination? Were these entities actually in my room? I couldn't really tell what was occurring. But when it faced me, the face was it wasn't a lion, but it was definitely lion-like. I remember I could see whiskers on its face. I could see kind of stubble. It had kind of like a plump muzzle. And one of its eyes looked like might have been scratched out or scarred. It might have even been blind in its left eye. But it looked like it had been in a few cat fights. It was kind of rather mangy looking. And it comes at me, facing me. I wasn't scared. It didn't look that terrifying, believe it or not, the way I was interpreting it. But then all of a sudden, its face changed. it changed into the most horrible thing you could think of. It was looked like wrinkled hag or old man of decay, very grayish skin on the face. And I remember the entity itself, the scales were a black glossy like scales and it had this grayish underbelly. But when it turned to face me like this, when the face changed, I became in a state of extreme horror and terror. I had goosebumps all over my body. I thought this was the end of my existence. I felt like this thing was coming at me to devour me or my soul. Again, this is not normal reality. And I'm a mechanical engineer and I'm seeing this stuff. It's like I was trying to interpret it and take this all in. So here it is. This thing felt evil. It's projecting, it's making me feel like I'm about to die. I'm in a state of extreme horror and fright. And I did something entirely different. I decided to lower my ego and I just projected love onto it. Mm. Now, I don't know if that was my thought to project love onto it or if there was a higher source giving me that idea to do that. But I remember
that's common, George. If the schizophrenic projects love onto the voices, they can't stand it. You know, that's a common thing. So I think that came from your guardian angels.
As I said, I'm giving you the story of what happened. There's always looking at this projection and interpreting it. There's multiple ways of looking at this stuff, but Jerry could definitely be onto something major there. So I projected love onto it. I was ready to die. I mean, that's what I thought was going to happen. All of a sudden, it seemed to disappear, vaporize, or pulverize. I just knew that I was aware that I'm still alive. I'm still here. I didn't die. What was that? What just happened? Next thing I know, there's a different entity hovering overhead. And I realized this isn't over. There's more to what's going on here. Now, this new entity was very different. And I'm not an artist here, but I tried to draw what it looked like. But it had its face was illuminated. It was almost like mask-like, but it was sheer beauty, undescribable beauty. Now, I don't know if I captured it here in the mask that I drew, but you have to visualize this thing was beauty beyond description. And I remember it seemed to have these energetic discharges that could be interpreted as wings, the way it was moving around its face and everything. And its eyes were closed. And I realized I was aware of it being in my room, but it was not aware of me yet. It's almost like it wasn't aware that I was there. Now, time seemed to be kind of a little distorted with what was going on, but I still knew I knew I was still in my room because the square ceiling light fixture was still there behind all this. So that gave me a data point to kind of focus on. That was my constant throughout this whole ordeal. And this I came up on the internet years later. Again, I had this vision back in 1991. This is stuff I've come across in the last couple of years. So these are some images of, you can say, a seraphim. Mm-hmm. But this is close. This is close to the face that I saw. As I said, it was sheer beauty. It was androgynous looking, but of a feminine nature. I remember it was so beautiful. Part of me was saying, I should be looking at this. This is from another realm of existence. I'm a mere mortal. I was almost ready to get up and run out of the room just because, out of respect for that, I should be seeing this stuff. But it was just sheer undescribable beauty. And I mentioned it had like energetic discharges that and looked like wings. I think might have been 3 pairs of wings, might have been 4 pairs of wings. I don't distinctly remember the number, but I just remember seeing them kind of move around the face back and forth. And then all of a sudden, it opens its eyes, like it became aware of me. I didn't know what was going to happen next. I'm thinking that previous entity came in, turned into something horrible and frightening. I felt this was going to do the same thing because it was sheer beauty at this point in time. I was thinking I was probably going to switch and turn into something horrible now, come down at. But it didn't. It just kind of stared at me for a very long time. And the interesting thing with both these entities, it was almost like the sensation, these entities were both within me and outside of me at the same time. So I'm staring at the second entity here. Sheer beauty, undescribable beauty. I'm not sure what's going to happen next. It seemed as if it was either judging me or it was unaware where it was, or almost like it was something that had been in prison for a while, was suddenly released, but was not aware that it was released. It's difficult to probably interpret exactly what was occurring, but I just remember there were weird sensations as it's just kind of staring at me. I didn't know what was going to happen next. This went on for quite a while. It's probably no more than five minutes or so, but it felt like an eternity. The wings are fluttering back and forth. Meanwhile, the fog or cloud is kind of fading or dissipating, but the portal's still there behind it. I do remember that. So we're just staring and staring and staring. I didn't know what was going to happen next. And then all of a sudden, this beautiful looking entity, it smiles at me. I remember I could even see dimples form when it smiled at me. And when it smiled at me, I just felt this wave of love, joy, bliss, ecstasy come from it. It was ecstasy beyond belief. And I knew that I was going to be okay. It's almost like it was telling me that everything was going to be okay. And part of me is still a little frightening because this is not normal reality. The fact that this entity projected love, joy, bliss, understanding upon me, it gave the indication that everything was going to be okay. So the next thing I know, I start to have an out-of-body experience. I felt like I'm rising out of my body and I'm starting to merge with this entity. It's like we're merging and becoming one simultaneously. At the same time, this entity is moving back in reverse, going into that portal that the other entity came out of. And I'm merging with this entity simultaneously. I was in a state of, it was definitely an altered state of being or consciousness, as we were both like kind of merging together as one being. And just as we're about to cross over and go into this portal, as almost like one being, we were 100% merging. Just as I was about to cross over and go in the portal, I fell back asleep, or I was put back to sleep. Everything, I just know everything went gray. It wasn't like I gradually fell asleep. I was very aware that boom, I went out, like something was putting me back to sleep. So everything went gray, and everything went dark. So I woke up the next day, probably about 7 or sometime between 7 and 8 o'clock in the morning. I was in a state of religious shock. I'm like, what just happened? But I'll say this much. That was the turning point of my schizophrenia. Because here I was praying to God, give me a sign. I have this vision. And it kind of proved to me that everything I was going through prior to that was legitimate, was real. Now, I was still seeing a psychiatrist and a psychologist being an outpatient at this point in time. I never told them about the hallucination because, one, I didn't want them to put me on any harder drugs. They had me on a low dose of Klonopin at the time, which is kind of a mood stabilizer. I wasn't on any of the more extreme psychiatric drugs at that point in time. And two, this was the only thing holding me together at this point in time. It gave me the footing to start rebuilding myself. I didn't want this psychiatrist to say, "Oh, it's just a mere hallucination." I didn't want to hear that. I wanted to grasp on it as being something spiritual and legitimate. And this thing comes about a few decades later called the internet, which has so much information on it that you're able to pull from. You realize, wow, there's other people having these experiences. So that entity, the stick-like entity, is actually referred to as Yaldabaoth is the most common name for it. And if you're aware of Gnosticism, the Gnostics refer to this entity as being a lower god. it's almost like something that thinks it's God, and it gets to the whole story of Sophia and Yaldabaoth. Are you familiar with Gnosticism at all, Alexandra?
If I feel?
Are you familiar with Gnosticism?
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay. So when I'm talking about Yaldabaoth and Sophia, you're kind of understanding what I'm talking about then. Okay. So there's multiple ways of interpreting the second entity, the beautiful one. That could have been Sophia herself, holy guardian angel. And based on some of the Gnostic stories, is that there's fragments of Sophia within all of us. It's kind of the divine spark within us. Now, when I had this hallucination, I had no knowledge of Gnosticism. I just came across Gnosticism in about the last couple of years or so. And the Nag Hammadi Library is a series of Gnostic scriptures discovered about 1945 in the Egyptian desert. And within one of those scriptures, there's a book called the Apocryphon of John. And that was written in the 2nd century AD, probably prior to 185 of the Common Era. And now I'm going to read a section out of that scripture to you. And when she saw the consequences of her desire, changed into a form of a lion-faced serpent, and its eyes were like lightning, fire which flashed. She cast it away from her, outside that place, that no one of the immortal ones might see it, for she had created it in ignorance. And she surrounded it with a luminous cloud. And she placed a throne in the middle of the cloud that no one might see it except the Holy Spirit, who was called the Mother of the Living. And she called his name Yaldabaoth. So here it is. I had this vision of some entity with a serpentine body, a lion-like face, coming out of a cloud. Now here's a scripture about 185, just prior to the 185 of the Common Era, the 2nd century, that describes very much kind of what I went through. It just goes to show that there really is something to these religious scriptures, that our ancestors went through some of the same stuff. They seem to have a better understanding of it than we do these days. And there's another part in those scriptures that talks about Yaldabaoth having a multitude of faces. So there's a whole story in Gnosticism about this relationship between Yaldabaoth being her child, the child of Sophia, also known as wisdom, and the relationship that they have back and forth. And depending on the particular Gnostic scriptures, they give different interpretation of what's occurring. But there's a common theme here going on, that we are more than the sum of our flesh and blood and bones, that we do have a soul and a spirit, that we're more than just Darwin's theory of evolution. There's really something going on beyond the physical realms. There are alternate realms of reality. I'm not going to try and tell you exactly what's going on, because I'm not certain. I mean, I have speculations and conjectures. You see people out there on YouTube and social media presenting their views on things. All that I can say is that there's something going on, but we as humans and mortals don't quite know what it is.
Well, I've been on the front lines of mental health for decades. I've spoken to these entities. I've argued with them. I've watched patients argue with them. They are not a part of the schizophrenic. They're coming in from the outside. Like I said, they run patterns. They're completely very destructive. They're very negative. They're constantly telling people you're no good, you're rotten, nobody loves you. Your friends are only hanging around you to be kind. Your parents don't love you. People are following you. I mean, anything to upset them. These things are doing, and it's almost like they're all made out of the same cookie cutter in some place in the universe, because these patterns are the same. The patterns are the same in Georgia, where I worked at the big state hospital, as they were here in Arizona, and now that I'm working with people all over the planet, these patterns are the same for all of these voices.
And did you ask them, Jerry, how do these entities look like?
Ask the patients what they look like?
Yes.
Well, a lot of times they don't see them. They just hear them. Okay. Now, the ones who do see things, they're awful. They're monsters coming out of the wall. They see the shadow people, which I think are different from what the voices are. You know, they're three-dimensional shadows that appear to scare people. I don't think they're good things, but meth addicts see them, schizophrenics see them. You know, they can walk through walls. When I started understanding about those, or discovering those, when I was working with schizophrenics in the prison who had gone psychotic on meth. So amphetamines is one of the drugs that has caused more schizophrenia than any other drug I have ever seen. I mean, and you know, the way it works is the person using the meth feels like Superman. They have a lot of energy, they get a lot done, it feels good. They keep using it and then they crash. So what happened eventually, they start having what they called hallucinations, which were the voices coming and telling them bad stuff. And they go, oh, well, that's just a hallucination. When they come down, the voices go away. So that might happen 5, 10, 50, 100 times. And then one day, the voices don't go away. And they're just as psychotic, they're just as schizophrenic as anybody in the mental hospital. You know, the same patterns that the voices run. And the prisoners called amphetamine the devil's drug.
So
So
that's the first one, yes.
yeah. So these voices run, like Anan said, they're anti-religious. You know, they don't want anything to do with religion. They hate the human race. They especially hate children. Okay? They foster and create negative emotion. You know? They get louder after sunset. They get louder when ignored. And I don't know how many times I've heard psychiatry tell a patient, well, they're just hallucinations, ignore them. You know, that doesn't work. They get louder and more persistent if you try to ignore them. Okay? They foster self-destructive behavior. I don't know how many patients I've saw in the psychiatric rehab center where we're putting them through vocational rehabilitation. As they're about to graduate, the voices kick in. They go off their meds, the voices kick in, and they get in trouble, and they don't graduate. So they don't want anything good happening to the people that they are in. They foster self-destructive behavior. And you look at, you know, in the United States right now, close to 50,000 people kill themselves every year. Okay? Most of them on antipsychotic and antidepressive drugs. Okay? And a lot of these shootings happen on antidepressive drugs. So you look at the overall picture right now, and there's more psychiatrists, there's more psychologists, there's more mental health people on the planet now, there's more psychiatric drugs on the planet now than ever in the history of mankind. And look at what's happening. You know, 50,000 people in the US killing themselves every year. Suicide's the 11th leading cause of death in the US, and it's increasing every year. So 10,000 Americans are diagnosed with schizophrenia every year. These drugs that they're giving these people are not curing anything. They're just treating symptoms. They're not doing any research into looking for a cause. And like Anan was telling you, and like I've seen in my entire career, these voices cause schizophrenia. If you can get rid of them by any means whatsoever, exorcism, you know, drugs, meditation, if you can get rid of them by anything, all symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia disappear with them. But the establishment doesn't want you to look into that. You know, you look at the Bible. I mean, there was what 23 times I think Christ cast out demons or these evil spirits out of people. It's in the Bible. But yet Christians today go, oh, we're scientific now. No, there's no demons anywhere around. They're just not around. That's a 2,000-year-old Bible story. It's not valid anymore. The devil, it isn't. You know, as a nonsense, they're still here.
We can use different semantics. You could call them interdimensional beings. You could call them foreign entities. There's different ways of looking at this. But I think you take a scientific approach, but admit that they're real. I think that's a better way of dealing with them, because they feed off of trauma. That's what they're doing. They're feeding off the trauma of the human species. And if we can reduce the overall trauma among ourselves, it would probably end up pushing these entities away, or probably we're a food source for them or a drug for them, depending how you look at it. But if you get rid of the voices, you're addressing the trauma that you've endured over time, and you're basically closing those fissures in your psyche so these entities have to leave. And I think the reason why I haven't been on any meds for schizophrenia since 1992, 1993, approximately. I think what happened, at least in my case, they realized they weren't going to have any more success with me. They weren't able to use me as a food source anymore. I was standing up to them. I was kind of laughing at them sometimes.
They hate that.
They don't like it when you win. And I think they basically, I think pretty much they give up because they realize we're not going to be successful with this person anymore. He's on to us, or she's on to us, and they move away.
So that's one of when I was working psych crisis in the ERs, they didn't want you working with the patients there. They just wanted you getting them out of the ER. You know, just move them out, take them somewhere. You know, that was my job there. But I wanted to help these people, and I couldn't spend a lot of time with them. So I'm like, okay, what piece of information can I give them that would help them the most in the very short time I had with them? And I had to be very careful with that, because if they went and told psychiatry what I told them, I'd be in trouble again.
Yes.
All right. So the two pieces were that these are not hallucinations. These are entities. They are not who you are. They're invading and attacking you. And number two, and the voices hated this more than anything else, is that they're parasites. They're feeding off of you. They're taking your life energy and sucking it out of you. They hated that. They would always react violently when I told the patient that piece of information. I had one get up and run out of the office. I mean, she just couldn't deal with it. But they would always appear when I told them that piece of information, and they would start telling the patient, this guy's crazy, don't listen to him, he's a nutcase, get out of his office, don't talk to him anymore. That was consistent.
So Jared, using these non-medical methods, you've had lots of successes in getting patients to get rid of the voices or curing schizophrenia. Am I correct?
Well, maybe a few dozen.
Okay.
With now this Mace energy method that is coming into play now, an energetic therapy, it gets rid of the trauma which they feed off of. Okay, so what they'll do is, I heard one patient tell me that they hang around the trauma site, and when that's triggered, they kind of pour gasoline on it and make it worse. And then they generate all this negative emotion, and then they suck it out of the person, and the person is just eviscerated. They have no energy after these things attack. But yeah, they do feed on the trauma, and since they're energetic beings, they can go into the mind of the individual, and they can actually bring these things up and rub it in their face. Do you remember when you did this? Do you remember when you did this bad thing? Do you remember when you hurt this person? And just keep on them, and just keep hitting them and hitting them and hitting them,
yes,
until they turn their emotional state negative.
Time of the person. Yes.
Yeah. Or you might say something to somebody, and you go, well, I shouldn't have said that. And they go, yeah, you shouldn't have said that. Now they, you really hurt this person, and now they're not going to like you anymore. Or this is what they're going to think, something bad of you. And it just goes on and on and on. We're the only animal on the planet that does that. Other beings don't do that. A lion attacks a gazelle, and when the gazelle's out in safely, it forgets all about that and goes on with its life. But not us humans. We just keep remunerating it over and over and over again. That's them doing that. They can go in, and I've had them go in and pull out something that a patient had done like 25 years ago, and bring that up that the patient had actually forgotten himself, and told me that the voices brought that up and rubbed it in his face. So they will feed off of guilt and trauma, and every negative emotion, they will try to feed it.
So Alexander, you've been great listening to us. We've been doing all this talking, and
yes,
it's kind of your show. Is there anything you wanted to add or questions?
I wanted to ask also, Jerry, do you want to explain to us and to the people who are listening to you, because Mace therapies, I mean, worldwide, I think now, there, I think so much therapists around the world. Can you explain to us how do you treat patients, and how much time, I will say, it takes for someone to really recover from the trauma? if we can?
Well, what happened? They have something they call the rune. So this is the biggest trauma that happened to the person. Okay. Mace will go in there and remove that usually within an hour. It's gone. It's no longer there. Okay? Because thoughts are energetic, feelings are energetic, memory is energetic. So we're talking about energy here. Your being is energetic. So Mace takes into account the being, the soul. Okay. Now, what John Mace found was that positive absorbs negative. Okay. The spirit or the being is positive. The trauma is negative. Okay? So what he needed to find, or what he was looking for, was a way for the being to absorb the trauma. Okay. Now, what he found was that the mind doesn't work like most people think it does, or like psychiatry and psychology think it does, but more like what Anan was saying when he was seeing those trails that time, where he said picture after picture after picture after picture. So what Mace discovered was that the mind doesn't think, it doesn't reason, it doesn't do any of the stuff that we normally think it does. What it does is it takes pictures of where you focus your attention. Okay? And that's all it does. You know, so it will turn a physical object into a picture, but it can also turn an emotional or spiritual or feeling or concept into an image. Okay. And once it's turned into an image, you can arrange for the spirit to absorb it. Okay. And when it absorbs it, it turns it positive. Okay. So what happens in a trauma is that all your attention is focused on you because it's happening to you. Right. And you don't make good decisions while you're in a trauma. So what the person does is, you know, they look at what's happening to them and they make a decision about themselves as a result of this awful traumatic thing that's happening to them. Now, at the same time the trauma is occurring, there's a very negative, overwhelming, strong feeling. It's like the floor falls out from under you. It's a horrible feeling and it won't go away. It just sits there and it tortures you. So the ego shows up and goes, hey, let me have this. I'll handle it. And it takes it and it buries it in your subconscious mind. And then it locks it down, but it's buried alive. So what it does is it affects your thinking. It affects your decisions. It affects how you come across to people. It's like a computer virus operating in the background, but because it's buried in your subconscious, you're not aware of it. Okay. So what Mace does is he uses the spirit, which knows where all that garbage is buried, to find it. So the way it's found is the decision that the person makes about themselves during the trauma is what's called a negative identity. So a lot of times as a result of the trauma, the person might go, well, I came to the decision that I was worthless because this thing happened to me. Okay. So that gets put in the virus, and the computer virus in the back of the mind. They're operating all the time with that subconscious feeling that they're worthless. Right? They're making decisions and interacting with people because they feel worthless. That's what Mace calls a negative identity. Okay? It's buried in the subconscious mind. It's active. It's controlling your behavior. It's controlling your thinking. It's controlling your decisions, your behavior, but you're not aware of it because it's buried in its subconscious. So what Mace does is it will turn that negative identity into an image. Okay. Now, one of the things that Mace struggled with was, where is that stuff buried? You know, it could be buried anywhere in the subconscious mind. Okay. How do you find it? So what he did is he kind of found out that the spirit, or what he calls the being, will locate that for you with an image. Okay. So you kind of ask the person, okay, put your attention on this negative identity. What are its characteristics? Turn that all those characteristics and that negative identity into an image. That image is the location of that negative identity. Once you have the location, you can focus the being on it with your attention, and it will grow. It will grow depending on how much damage it is. That image will get massive. That's all negative energy caused by that trauma. Then you hook the attention to that negative identity, and the being will absorb it and transmute it back to positive energy. And within an hour, it'll be gone. So it could be the biggest trauma that ever happened to you. In an hour, you say, well, okay, how do you feel about this trauma that happened to you now? Imagine you're there, it's happening again. How do you feel about it now? And they go, well, okay, I see it, I remember it, but it doesn't have any emotional charge. It doesn't bother me anymore. And then you go back to the decision they made during the trauma. Can you convince me you're worthless right now? They'll think about it and they go, no, it's gone. It's absolutely gone. It's not there anymore. It was an energetic structure within the psyche of that person. This is an energetic therapy. It works in the energetic universe. There is no time, there is no space, there is no matter in that universe.
Anon, did you try this therapy with Jerry, or maybe you're completely...
I had to run you a session with you, Anon. I need to do that just so you can experience it, because I haven't given him one, but I've given other people who come on with me. I've worked with them, and they've seen the result of this too.
But I did one with Sherelle. I actually did one with Sherelle directly of the Mace Energy. Yeah. The lady that runs the Mace Institute there in
Cherie.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yes,
actually, I did a session with her. I'm too stubborn of a mechanical engineer. That's part of my problem. It's tough when you get into that good hypnotic meditative state to get into it.
It's really not hypnosis.
That's my fault. I have to get more into it, type of thing, to get more
relaxed.
It's
an active therapy. It's like a conversation, right? So
yeah, it doesn't require any conversation. Matter of fact, the therapist doesn't even have to know what that trauma is.
Right. So you don't have to reveal the trauma to anybody.
Right. You just need to know where it happened. You don't have to know when it happened, who was involved with it, any of the details. So, women who were sexually molested or boys they don't have to talk about that trauma like they do in regular therapy, beating it to death over and over and over again. It works anyway, even though the therapist doesn't know what happened, as long as they follow the instructions.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it works quick, and it works, and it's permanent. It's not like, oh yeah, well, maybe it went away, maybe it didn't. They can feel the results right away. They can feel the energy shift right away.
But you can't heal yourself, though. You actually need a Mace practitioner to guide you through the sessions. So
yeah,
it does require somebody to work with you on that.
And you can find, any of you who are thinking of using the toxic psychiatric drugs to deal with your problems, they're not going to cure anything. Go to causisminstitute.com. That's CAUSISMINSTITUTE.com, and read about causism. There's a whole list of therapists there that, if you can get one that's not busy, sign up for one. Sign up for a session. It's the only therapy that I've seen in 50 years that actually works. And there's a lot of people who worked in mental health and in nursing, and who've come to the same point I did. None of this works. None of this garbage they taught us in college and graduate school. It just doesn't work. It doesn't have any lasting effect. When I ran into this, it was like, holy cow, look at this. And I started using it, reading Mace's books, and I was able to piece together enough of it, and it was working then. And then when I met Cherie, she goes, why don't you come for certification? There's a lot more to it than what you realize. So I eventually went and got certified. And like I said, I've never seen anything like this. I had a couple of patients where the voices completely disappeared, and another therapist where they said the voices completely disappeared. Others said the voices got weaker because the trauma had disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it actually works, and it's much cheaper than going to a psychiatrist and eating their toxic drugs.
Anon, can you say that you're completely healed from these voices? How are you feeling today?
Yeah,
And
I think last time I heard a voice was maybe a few years ago, but sometimes the voices can be, I feel, from beneficial entities. Sometimes they're from negative entities. I just feel like what we're facing a lot is a lot from the negative entities. But it's been years since I've had to deal with those voices, and I live a very fruitful life these days. I mean, I've got a family, wonderful family. Uh, Paid off my mortgage a few years ago, so hoping to retire in a few more years down the road. But as Jerry said, it's not a life sentence. Schizophrenia is not a life sentence. It can be cured. It takes work. It takes mental work. And what's the option? Would somebody just take drugs the rest of their life and destroy the brain over time, or to do the psychiatric work with the brain to address the soul and the spirit?
Yes.
Through certain various methods that are out there, such as the Mace energy method.
It's a spiritual disorder. Now, one thing's interesting. If you go look at these patterns on my website, they match exactly what's coming over the mainstream media right now from the deep state. It's a one-to-one correspondence between what these psychotic voices tell schizophrenics and what the mainstream media is telling us right now. It's negative. They're anti-religious. They foster and create negative emotion. They create fear. It's all this negative garbage constantly coming over the television. All this, burning churches, all this satanic stuff. This child molestation stuff, this human trafficking. I mean,
the news bombards us with trauma every other hourly basis.
And it's the same patterns. They're running the same patterns as schizophrenics here. There's no difference. It's a one-to-one correspondence.
Do you want to add something else? I'm so thankful that you're here and telling everybody that schizophrenia can be cured. There's a way. And I mean, you have an amazing journey from I think that your faith healed you. Right?
It had a lot to do with it, definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you got to get on a positive spiritual path and stay there.
That's amazing. Do you want to add something else? But because I mean, you told us everything, but some details you want to add or?
Well, I do feel there's some sort of spiritual battle going on out there beyond our visual realms. I know that that's sound a little bit off the deep end on what I'm saying, but hey, I work from here. I have a very logical mind, but there's stuff going on that we can't see or visualize. We're not just our bodies. There is something more to us. We do have a soul or a spirit, however you want to look at it. And there's all sorts of scriptures out there, and sometimes they coincide, sometimes they contradict. As a saying I've often heard, they say, write your own gospel, live your own myth, meaning find your way to the Godhead that works for you. Yes. There's multiple paths out there. Just that it should be a path paved with love, compassion, gratitude, and forgiveness.
I fully agree.
It's not about not about building our egos, not about being a narcissist. It's not about us. It's about everybody. But I think the world as a whole has a fractured psyche, and I think we've got to work on each individual healing themselves to reduce the trauma that's going on out there. I mean, the world seems crazy these days. I think there's something going on in these spiritual realms too, and so I think something's coming to a head over the next few years. Who knows? But I think humanity has hope. I have hope for humanity. The fact we still exist on this planet is amazing, and I think we'll get through things. But we have to kind of go back to some of the ancient scriptures, the ancient beliefs, and work on our mental health to realize there's more to life than meets the eye.
And understand that your thoughts don't come from you. You have thousands of thoughts going through your head every day. If you think those thoughts are who you are, then who's listening to those thoughts? The person listening to those thoughts is who you are. Those thoughts aren't you. They're coming in from the outside. They come in from negative sources. They come in from positive sources. They're like, your mind is like a radio receiver. Where, you got somebody tuned to acid rock. That's what's going to come in. You got somebody tuned to Gregorian chants. That's what's going to come in. It's what your chief love is. is what's going to attract those thoughts to you. But the negative entities are going to keep putting negative thoughts into your head. They sound just like all your other thoughts, but they slip them in there. The intent is very different. The intent is very negative. It's very destructive. You know, you can't do this, or you're stupid, or, you know, it's all negative stuff, totally negative stuff. You know, the intent is different from your intent. Right? One thing you need to remember is the reaction of these negative voices to the 23rd Psalm. You know, I've had, you know, at least 2 or 3 patients tell me that the voices react to the 23rd Psalm like worms thrown on a hot frying pan. They can't stand it. You know, it's like punching them in the face or punching them in the stomach. So if you start getting negative thoughts, start repeating the 23rd Psalm. You know, say, that's a lie. That's a lie. You have to be responsible for the thoughts that you accept, because you're going to get thoughts from all over the place. You're the chooser of which thoughts you want to accept into your being. You know, so you have to watch what's coming in, because they're going to keep feeding you negative thoughts, negative beliefs, all kinds of negative stuff. They want to turn you negative. They want your emotions turned negative, and then they will feed off you. And it's all of us, not just schizophrenics. You know, like how many people were just walking along and they're driving along. They go, I wonder what it'd be like to turn into oncoming traffic. Or they're standing on the edge of a bridge and go, well, oh, maybe I should jump, or you know, maybe I should kill myself. Virtually all suicides are these voices telling the person to kill themselves. You know, they don't decide that on their own. This is coming in from outside. Like Anan was saying, these things hate the human race. They want us dead. Yeah. It's like, you know, psychiatry and psychology are curing nothing. They don't even know what's going on. They completely ignore the spiritual side of the human being, and you can't do that. We're spiritual beings. You can't just say, okay, we're animals, and you know, let's manipulate the behavior. You know, the behavior comes from the spirit. It comes from the being. You know, and they totally ignore that.
Now, if I may, I did write a book that kind of brought me to this point in my life. It's has some positive experiences in there. It's a little bit about my investigation into religion. It's called Revelations on Interstellar Highway 10. It's probably going to mirror image there.
All right.
And I have a website, asteroxrising.com. It's spelled ASTEROXRISING.com. But the book kind of gets into some of my explorations. It's what got me to this point. And it's kind of helped me understand more about what I went through, and the search for truth, meaning, and purpose in life is really what the book's about. It doesn't specifically get into some of my more detailed experiences as schizophrenic, but it does help any person who's on the spiritual path to try and figure out, you know, what's it all about? What is meaning? What is God about or not about? That sort of thing. It doesn't answer all the questions. It probably creates even more questions, but at least it's...
I understand. To come back to our own essence, if I can say. Yes.
Yeah, it's good words for it. Exactly.
Yes.
So I'm glad you brought up the book, because Sherry and I wrote one too. Now, Sherry also heard voices when she was a young woman, and we worked on this book together. It exposes the voices, it exposes what they are, how they drive the schizophrenic, how they operate, and what psychiatry is, and how psychiatry operates, and it's not good. So if you want to know more about what these voices are and how they operate, what you can do about them, it's in here. Okay. So you can get that on my website at jerrymarzinsky.com, also spelled JERRYMARZINSKY.com.
Thank you so much, Jerry, Anon. It was a pleasure. It's a very important subject for me to combine again, you know, spirituality and science, so-called. And I can wait to have you again if you want here.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yes. Well, have a good day, both of you. Here in Paris, it's late now.
Oh.
And see you very soon.
Okay. Send us
Thank
a
you very
link
much,
when
Alexandra.
send us a
Very
link
much.
when you have it up.
Of course, from the bottom of my heart, thank you.
You're more than welcome.
It's our pleasure.
Yeah, our pleasure.